Today is May 7th in the year 2008. I'm Karen Herman with the Archive of American Television. It is my great pleasure today to be interviewing Michael King here at his home in Pacific Palisades, California.
Well, thank you again for joining us today. The first question we're going to start off with is, what was your name at birth?
It was Yuki Schultz, but no one liked it, so we changed it. No. It was the same as the one you let into, Michael Gordon King. Okay.
Did you have any nicknames growing up?
My dad had a little nickname for me when I was 3, but it's kind of silly. But I did name a racehorse after it, and out of a Secretariat. So it was a great horse. Didn't do very well, but it had great bloodlines, And I named it Mickle the Mouse.
That was your nickname as a kid?
When I was 3, it didn't go past that.
When were you born?
March 8th, 1948.
And where?
Rahway, New Jersey.
Is that where you grew up?
I grew up in New Jersey, different parts, mostly southern Jersey.
What was your father's name?
Charles Allen King.
And what did he do?
He was entrepreneur. I'd say he was really probably more of a idea promotion, advertising, creative programming guy, and super salesman, So he did a lot of stuff. He, created great, believe it or not, tobacco at one point was an important part of broadcasting. And so he worked for a cigarette company, and because he had worked so closely with the radio networks and the programs, he went from that into broadcasting. So he started out in marketing, I guess.
And your mother's name?
Lucille King.
What did she do?
She was the greatest audience you could have. She had a lot of performers in the family, so someone had to be the audience. But she was a very elegant woman, and she was a full-time mom, wife.
What do you think you inherited from your parents?
Well, first of all, I was very fortunate that my mom and dad really it was a great love story. My mom really loved my dad since she was 3. And he was, I think he was about 9 years older. So that obviously was a problem. But she caught up, and he was smitten, and they just always had a great relationship. And that helped, because, and she, her full-time job was raising her kids and taking care of the house and her husband. And so that was a good environment. My dad was, he was very, family is important to him too. But he was this really pretty bigger than life entrepreneur. He was a big guy, and about 6'3", at times up to 300 pounds, but he wasn't a fat guy. He was kind of like a cross between Jackie Gleason, because he used to wear a flower in his lapel in that Homburg, and a very dapper guy, and John Wayne, because he was a tough guy, But he wasn't too tough to tell us he loved us, or, if we had our dog had a litter and the little guy died, he'd cry like a baby, So that was a pretty cool environment. And then my dad had these ideas, and sometimes they worked, sometimes they didn't,
Do you think you took after him in that way?
Yeah, no question about it. I think all of the King brothers did, and the King sisters. There's 6 of us, 4 boys and 2 girls.
What are the names?
My oldest brother, Bob. The next oldest, my brother Richie. Roger was the 3rd oldest, and my sister Karen. And I was the 5th child, youngest boy, and then my younger sister Diana.
What was that dynamic like?
Bob and Richard were considerably older, so they were really out of the house pretty, as far as I was concerned, fairly early. My brother Bob is 8 years older than I am, so I think he left when he was about 18, so I was 10. you know. And my brother Richie was out and about, you know, around the same time because he went into the Army. And so, you know, I was this, it was really more of the younger group, which Roger was more aligned with that group. So he was kind of like the ringleader, you know, 2 boys and 2 girls. And so we had a lot of fun.
What kind of kid were you?
You know, I think, you know, I was a good little kid. You know, you know, we really, I think, you know, when you were to say what you received from your parents, my mom was a very, very gentle, loving person. And my dad was very loving too, but he wasn't as gentle. And so I've said to people before that, you know, I received a lot of strength from my dad, and I received a lot of the loving, sensitive side from my mom more, I'd say. And my mom was a very, very smart woman, and she read a lot, and so she really pushed, you know, school, especially to the younger ones.
What were your interests growing up?
You know, same as any kid, you know. Although we grew up around radio and TV, so like I said, we grew up with this character. You know, he was a performer. You know, in his radio shows, he literally not only produced them, but he was the warm-up guy. You know, he would tell jokes and sing, and he had a great voice, and so he was a performer and a great salesman, and he just always followed his dreams, and he didn't always follow the steps. He's a very trusting guy. You know, his philosophy was that his word was his bond and his handshake was his contract. And he got screwed a lot because of that. So I subscribe to the same philosophy as my dad, but I like to strain the relationship a little more and reduce it to paper, you know. So, and that's worked out real well because we could have had a lot of problems too.
Did you used to go to work with him when you were a kid, or see him in action?
Well, you know, he had so many different businesses. Ultimately, you know, his workforce in the beginning would be his kids, you know. But my dad was in radio, and then when radio went out of business, and he had the biggest radio shows, by the way. He had, excuse me, he had a show with Rudy Valley, who, believe it or not, was a superstar, and his show was one of the biggest, and that was my dad's show. And he worked with Basil Rathbone, who was later came back in our lives by when we acquired a movie library with Sherlock Holmes starring Basil Rathbone. But my dad did a radio show, and he did a show with Gloria Swanson, who was, I guess her big fame for film buffs today would be Sunset Boulevard. But she really was, you know, more of a even earlier star than that, including Silence, I believe. And anyway, when radio came in, it was, you know, became what TV is today. And but when TV came in, it literally crushed radio. So my dad went out of business from like a Friday to a Monday almost. And to give you an idea how much he believed in integrity, he could have declared bankruptcy and been a multimillionaire. And you know, his lawyer said you can probably get away with 30 cents on the dollar. And my dad said, I'm paying 100 cents on the dollar. So we, you know, had these gigantic falls, you know, from the big house and to the summer rental in the wintertime, you know. And but you know, it was never there was never even a consideration he would do it any differently. So we grew up with that kind of integrity, you know. But I will say the falls sometimes were pretty great. And then he'd come up with another idea. So now TV came in, and my dad created a TV show that was so successful that he went out of business, you know.
What was that?
Well, he had this local TV show in New York, and it was a kind of a combination variety game show. And he told everyone to call collect. And the phone bill put them out. So it's that kind of era that, you didn't have a lot of MBAs, figuring things out. They're kind of, always, feeling their way. And the truth is, it probably made it more fun, But, my dad obviously had to then get a job, and he started to work for other television companies. And he, every time he got a new job, he wound up rising to the top because he was an incredibly dynamic guy. And later we'll tell you how he started King World, because it's a pretty unique story. But it's that same entrepreneurial spirit, Excuse me.
So what did you want to be when you grew up? Did you know?
Well, let's see. I wanted to be a rock star that was was a gold medalist in the decathlon and in the NFL. So I didn't get any of them. So I had to settle for this,
So you really didn't know what that when you
No,
were
I just, we just had ideas, fantasies, Mostly just, I think rock and roll was probably my first love, I sang in a lot of bands. And my dad's singing voice came to only a couple of us, I had a good voice, and my sister Diana sang really well. And so in high school, the Beatles came on the scene, and all those great groups from England, and then you had the Beach Boys and all the Motown, and music just was cool. So I always thought, I really thought that was going to be my first real success, and and I had a lot of fun doing it. We were in a bunch of different bands, and but bands are like businesses, the startups, they personalities, and things happen, and next thing you know, they break up. And so there were a couple times I could have, I thought I had a shot to do something pretty exciting in that field, and just didn't work. But it was a lot of fun, and but my dad always talked to us about broadcasting, and he loved sales. He thought a salesman's job was a great profession. He really did talk to us about it. But there are a lot of salespeople that don't have a lot of integrity, and he felt that if you're going to be a good salesperson, you have to know you have to know everything there is about it, and never lie or make a deal that the other side doesn't walk away smiling. And it sounds kind of Pollyannish in a way, to make a deal that both sides walk away smiling. But the truth is, it's absolutely the best business philosophy. And that's because if you make a deal with somebody that doesn't work for them, ultimately they're not going to continue to do business with you. If you make a business deal with someone where they succeed as well as you can literally do business with those people your entire career. And that's what we did. If you go back over the different broadcasters that have been King World's biggest clients, they were the same ones for 25, 30 years.
That says a lot. Going back to your early years, did you watch a lot of television growing up?
Absolutely. I loved it. It was pretty much, it was probably the centerpiece in the family at night, right? There were only 3 networks, which is hard to believe. I know kids, 3, but that's all there were. In fact, in some cases, most people would describe it as 2.5. ABC was the fledgling network. So I didn't think you could have more than 3. And now, of course, there are hundreds of them, and some people say if you deal with the internet and everything, there's literally millions of networks. Each person could be a network, and so. It was great. You had when I grew up, you had I Love Lucy, and you had Jackie Gleason, and I do not know who watched television on the other channels when Twilight Zone was on. I didn't know anybody that watched the other channels. Or Ed Sullivan when the Beatles were on. I have no idea what the other shows were on the other networks. But yeah, that was pretty cool. You know, we were able to see things, from our little community and at the Jersey Shore all over the world, and of course you were able to see great variety shows, and they, they had great, there used to be a lot of Westerns on TV, and I'll never forget when I saw color TV for the first time. It blew me away, And I never will forget it. I was at Freddy's Pizzeria in Asbury Park, and Bonanza came on, and I had this pizza, a couple of pizzas for the family, and I literally watched the show with the pizzas on my lap. By the time I got outside, they were cold as ice, But, obviously it's changed a lot, But yeah, no, I think TV is great, and I think it's even better now. I really do. There's a lot of exciting stuff on TV. And when I think of TV now, I think of all of it. I think of the satellite, and I think of cable, and I think of, obviously over-the-air broadcasting as well.
Where did you graduate from high school?
It was 1966, June.
What school was it?
I graduated from Henry Hudson, in Atlantic Highlands.
And where did you go from there?
I literally stayed out of school for a year, and just didn't really feel like going for a while. And then I started these jobs that were just horrific. One worse than the other. Whether it would be, a truck driver or working in shipping and receiving. And I'll never forget. I came in this one department store. It was a local one. It was, pretty prestigious for the Jersey Shore, but Steinbeck's. It was kind of like Bloomingdale's for the Jersey Shore. And I remember I came in 5 minutes late at 7 in the morning. And this manager in shipping and receiving, just gave me a dressing down that this starts at 7 sharp. And he wouldn't tolerate it, and I apologized, And then I got my check in 2 weeks. And it was $26, so I just walked out, And then a series of those kind of jobs, and Vietnam. The war had heated up to a point where it was pretty serious, and I decided to go to school, and I wound up going to a junior college in Modesto Junior College, and I went there for 1 year.
What were you studying? What were you studying?
Just the basic, English and psychology and, a variety of, what normal first year college would be. And then after 1 year, I went back to Jersey and went to school at Fairleigh Dickinson University, where I graduated.
With a degree in?
Marketing and minor in broadcast. It's kind of like I knew what I was going to do.
What did you do when you graduated?
The first couple days after I graduated, my brother Richie picked me up, and I drove 200 miles to Worcester, Massachusetts, and moved in with him and started working in radio, selling local spots on a station called WORC, and they were literally $8 for a 30-second spot, and they were hard to sell. And then from there, my brother Roger, decided to come up and join us, and that was the first venture when the King brothers got together. And so Richie, Roger, and myself went across the street to this AM/FM, WAAB, and WAAF, and those two radio stations were not doing very well. They're actually 5th and 6th in the market out of 6 stations, and In a short period of time, we turned it into the #1 billing stations, but we also changed the programming. And the AM became a news and talk show, a talk radio, and the FM, which this was when most cars didn't have FM. So it was a little before, the big craze with FM music. But we had a very unique radio station, and it was progressive rock. And we started doing what we call album cuts. So we would have, 6-8 minutes before a break, So it was kind of a breakthrough at the time, and the AM station did well, but the FM became a really major FM that actually went into Boston, from Worcester, went into Boston, Springfield, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, and we actually had a following up in New Hampshire, and Mount Snow, and there was this underground rock place where they would break a lot of new groups, and they broke some big ones, and they loved WAAF, and anyway, it was a pretty wild group, but we went up there one weekend to broadcast what they were doing. They became a big advertiser, and we brought this young comedian with us named Jay Leno, and he was a very funny guy.
How'd you find him?
He kind of found us, He was working at in a car dealership. I don't exactly know what he was doing, but he loved cars, and he wanted to, pursue his career in entertainment, and we were a big radio station, so he just kind of called us and kept bugging us, and next thing you know, we started putting him in different things we did, and I wouldn't say we even remotely impacted his career, but it's kind of funny. Around 1973, that's when we first met Jay, and he was a riot.
Now you said 1973. Your father passed away in 72.
Mm-hmm.
How did that affect you?
Well, obviously, we were devastated. He seemed like he was, so powerful that you just didn't think that there'd be a time he wouldn't be there, and it definitely was a big void, and he was pretty sick at the end, and his company had a lot of problems, and he had a property called the Little Rascals, and in the late '60s and early '70s, there were a lot of social problems, civil unrest. Black communities were rioting, all over America in a lot of major cities, including New Jersey. There were several cities that Newark, New Jersey, burned to the ground. Plainfield and Jersey City. There were a lot of problems, and because of the nature of the Little Rascals, and the time frame it came from, it was at times considered improper. As a matter of fact, they thought it was the black community. Only a few smattering, groups thought it was somewhat of a racial slur. And in any event, there were only a few scenes in the series that you could say, yes, they were politically incorrect in the late '60s, '70s, but when they did it in the '20s and '30s, it was actually a breakthrough to have white kids and black kids in the same gang, and literally sleeping in the same bed, But they did do things for cheap gag, physical, hair stand up, lights go off and you'd see, the eyes and the teeth, and but they were just little bits of they went for a physical, I would say a cheap gag, but again at the time it wasn't. They didn't see it that way at all, and it won the Academy Awards. But 40, 50 years later. It was very sensitive, and my dad refused to edit the series. He felt that it was art, and it was historical. And Hal Roach was a brilliant man that helped build the film business. He was considered the king of comedy. He literally put Laurel and Hardy together, and worked with Charlie Chase and Harold Lloyd. And Frank Capra, by the way, started his career on the Little Rascals. So and Laurel and Hardy were gag writers and appear in it. So it was an important property for Hal Roach, and my dad just believed that you don't edit, classic properties, and so his business went down pretty badly. And then he was sick.
Was that his only property at that point?
Well, he had others that he distributed, but one was Joe Pine, and Joe was killed in a car accident, so that kind of left. And then, believe it or not, he had a property that's now the biggest properties in the world, and that he distributed a package of cartoons on the Marvel comic characters, But, for whatever reasons, those shows left, because, like I said, my dad had a lot of health issues at the end. So the only property that he really did have at the end was the Little Rascals. And, of course, with a lot of the social unrest, broadcasters weren't running it. So his business was going south pretty quick.
Was there any talk of closing down the business or not continuing?
No. He didn't have a big staff, though. I mean, he worked, out of his house. And he owned the property. So there wasn't really anything to close. He didn't have an office with a big staff. But he was a one-horse operation, And so when he passed away in April of 2072, strike that, in 1972, April 27th to be exact. And, because there wasn't really much of a business, we stayed in radio for a year. And, my dad loved radio, and we wanted to make those radio stations work. And in about a year, there was some real problems with the company and some bank loans that they had. So we all left the radio station, and that we had negotiated a part ownership in. And I was like 21 or 2. Actually 23, just turned 24, and I had a small piece of AM/FM in Worcester, Massachusetts. But we had to stay there 3 years, and the owner we dealt with was not a very honorable guy, and so that was our first experience where our word and our handshake didn't work. We should have signed a contract going in, we didn't, and then the emotional up and down of my dad passing, we literally walked out and we said, you just lost the King brothers. And later, the guy said he couldn't believe that. He took great pride in that. He started the King brothers, Of course, I don't think I would say he started. The first one that mistreated us, But in any event, so we walked out, and we didn't really have anywhere to go. And the only one that could take the real big pay cut was me. So I was the only one that started to work at full-time at King World. $150 a week gross.
What's your title?
I never really gave myself a title, but I guess I was acting president. But, I didn't think there should be another president, so I think I gave myself executive vice president. So there was nobody above me and nobody below me. I didn't even have a secretary. So I just felt King World should only have one president, and that would be my dad. And so we just chugged along for a little bit. I didn't know the business and had no contacts. We didn't have an organization. I had no staff, and we had no money. And I had to make money that week. And somehow we did. It was really miraculous. And sometimes I had to supplement my income with other work, parking cars at Widow Brown's. I was your valet man. But it was fun. And I was a young kid. It didn't matter. And I kept learning. And a lot of people, by the way, really loved my dad and respected him. And there were some people that went way up and beyond to, talk to us and guide us a little bit. And then, like I said to you earlier, probably before the tape, that my dad talked to us about broadcasting all the time. And so without realizing it, we really did have a good education on what broadcasting, radio, what sales and marketing and advertising. And so that was pretty much our base. And then I would call different stations, and I'd call the smallest market, Laredo, Texas, and I'd call the guy, and he was shocked anyone called him, So I'd ask him, what is the network? Why do you have this show at 4 and another station has a different one? Well, that's a network show, and I'm ABC, and he's NBC. Well, what about the 3 o'clock time period? Oh, that's syndicated. Well, how does that work? Well, we have local time. So this one gentleman took time to explain these different things to me, and then I'd get off the phone and I'd call Chicago. Well, you can move it here, boom, 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 boom. And nobody ever asked me any questions on how much I knew. So, and then just learning, then we really did have a pretty good understanding.
And what were you selling?
We were the book club. We were the bookstore with one book. We had Little Rascals. That was it. We sold it to, local TV stations all over America. Sold it to ABC affiliates, CBS affiliates, independents. We had numerous remakes. We had Broadway shows going, animated Christmas specials, all Little Rascals. We had a film compilation, Rascal Dazzle. We were always selling the Little Rascals because that's all we had.
Did you keep to your father's restriction of not editing it out?
No, I didn't agree with that. I believe that there was, it was a different time, and I believe that there were things in there that were politically incorrect. I watched the whole series completely a number of times. And it was not, if it were really a racial slur, if it was really, if the basis of the program was, demeaning to black people, I would never have gone forward. But the truth is, it was really a sight gag here and a sight gag there. It was never a storyline. And so I believe that we should, make sure that we had the original, uncut. We also found out that the negatives were turning to dust. They were old nitrates. So we had to, we converted all of the original negatives for the most part, although some were lost. I didn't know about it, my dad didn't. And it was very expensive to convert it to safety film. And then we re-edited the series and took out that sight gag here and there, and it really didn't have a lot to do with the show, so it stayed, pretty much intact. And they were great little feature films, really. They were shorts that ran theatrically and won the Academy Award. So, but we would not have put the show back on the air if we hadn't. And I didn't realize how we evolved over the years when I started. And then I had gone back to see the original uncut ones. And I will say that, 10 years later, when I hadn't been involved with the Rascals for a while, because we started doing other shows, as you know. And it was kind of like looking at Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey's circus today. It really does feel politically incorrect. I don't like it. I used to take my kids there. I couldn't anymore. Now that you see Cirque du Soleil, and you go back and you see Ringling Brothers, and you see what they do to the animals, and it just doesn't feel right. Well, I felt the same way when I saw the original uncut Little Rascals. After a while, I said, it really doesn't I didn't realize that they were quite as demeaning and maybe as they, even though they didn't mean to, and it was a breakthrough. When I got away from it for a while, and we don't realize that our tastes evolve, and we evolve. And looking back, it didn't play well for me. But the edited version does, so that was a good thing.
So talk about how the company rose under your direction.
Well, we could go on and on. I mean, let's see, we're talking 35 years. So do you have 35 years? You guys are gonna have some overtime here to blow your mind. There's so many stories during that time. I mean, realistically, there was only one employee for, God, I guess it was at least a year. And I was working on my brother Bob's house. He had a little $30,000 home. And if you were to go back and read Leonard Maltin's first book, Life and Times of the Little Rascals and Our Gang Comedies, with his partner Dick Ban, if you went in and you looked, you'd see King World's address was 903 Mountain Avenue, Berkeley Heights, New Jersey. And that's a residential area. And it was my brother's house, a little square house that was about $30,000. And that wasn't, that wasn't overwhelmingly expensive back then. It was a nice little development type home. And I worked out of there for about a year, and then I brought my girlfriend in because my sister-in-law didn't want any strangers coming in, And so that was it for a while. And then finally, after a couple of years, we moved to a $200 a month office above the barber shop in New Providence. We moved to the city, New Providence, New Jersey. And we did that for another 2 years. So it was really just selling the Little Rascals. And through the editing of the series, we were able to get the show back on the air. And my brother Bob played a very big, he really was the lead in this part of our careers. He worked with our number one customer, which was a company called Kaiser Broadcasting. And Kaiser Broadcasting they were a pioneer broadcasting group putting UHF stations on in LA, Chicago, Philadelphia, Boston, San Francisco, Cleveland, Detroit. They didn't have one in New York. And when we grew up, UHF TV was just not a factor. So they really lost a lot of money. But when they went on the air, that was what started King World. My dad sold the president of the company, Dick Block, who's still here. He's a consultant and a brilliant man. You should talk to Dick about anything in television. He's an amazingly bright man and still very alert. And I haven't seen him in a couple of years, but a really, really terrific man and a legend in the business. So my dad literally started the company selling the Little Rascals to that gentleman. So when they went on the air, these stations really had no ratings at all. And the only time period that they'd have any audience at all was when the Little Rascals came on. And they had a station here, it was KBSC, and it literally, there was zero audience leading into the Little Rascals. They call them chicken scratch, the audience was so low that it wasn't measurable, okay? And then the Rascals would come on and 100,000 people in LA tuned in. So that was the kind of pulling power the show had. So anyway, cutting to where we were, when we put the show on and it was edited, it really worked, and as I said with my dad's company, when he sold it, it really was a powerful show. And with the editing of the series, we were able to get it back on, and we put it on in 99% of America. And it turned into the number one children's show in America. And it was also the number one children's show with women 18 to 49, you know, which was pretty important. You know, advertisers were really going more towards women 18 to 49. And this was a nice way to get them. So it became an important show. And from there, we were able to hire some people, you know, but my brother, Bob, worked with Kaiser Broadcasting, which later went into Fields Communications, and then that group was bought primarily by Fox. And so they don't exist anymore. But working with Barry Thurston, who was the former CEO of Columbia Television, and but he was the program buyer for the entire group, and he worked with my brother and a gentleman named Harry Glass and his son Ed Glass in a company with Picture Scores, and they edited the entire series. And they, you know, with that, Kaiser put it back on the air. They didn't have to pay anything. They'd already paid us off. So we had to buy new prints for them, and, you know, they had 5 markets. And that was a big expense, you know, $5,000, you know. But we did, plus it cost literally several $100,000 to edit the series. That was a really big commitment. And Mr. Glass and his son Ed worked on it for several years, and they gave us an awful lot of credit. They did it because they loved my dad, and they believed we would be able to make that show work again.
So were you basically, they'd edit something and you'd send it out, or did they have to edit the whole series before you started?
We edited the entire series.
Now, were you interested in acquiring other properties of this?
We didn't have any money, so yeah, I was very interested. But you know, I like to buy everything I saw. You know, wouldn't it be nice, Raj, if we bought this building? You know, and we don't have any money. Oh, okay, let's get our sandwich and leave. You know, but yeah, no, we had big ambitions. You know, and but primarily, you know, everything we saw initially was the Little Rascals. You know, we did a Little Rascal comic strip that, you know, was another great story, and we sold it to King Features, of all things. And we weren't involved with them, but it was the Hearst Company, and which is from William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper tycoon. And in any event, you know, we were always looking to either merchandise the characters or create a new series of, you know, television programs. We were partners with Jerry Parental, who was Norman Lear's partner, and because he bought the station in Los Angeles from Kaiser, and he started this Oak Industries scrambled subscription TV, and which doesn't exist anymore. But before people had cable, Jerry Parental, you know, put on first-run movies and everything else, and you could scramble the signal. And if you got a decoder, you could get it at home. And then they took this little UHF station that was losing a fortune, and they turned it into kind of like a cable system in a sense, but it was over the air. And they had 250,000 customers a month that were subscribing to it. So it became a big business. But Jerry saw that the only show that had a rating prior to this subscription TV was The Little Rascals. So he talked Norman Lear into doing the new Little Rascals. And, you know, Norman was the king of comedy, and he was the most important producer in all of television. And so we were very excited about it, and we waived our you know, royalty fee so we could get more points. And it was a lot of money at the time. We're talking around 74, 75, and we waived $100,000. And, you know, I'm still not making more than $150, $200 a week, you know, so that was a big thing to waive it, but we just said, my God, this is so exciting. And it was the first show that Norman didn't sell. Why? Why?
Did you have a chance to work with Norman on it, on the actual production?
Well, Norman actually retired and created, just as we made our deal, he retired and created People for the American Way, which is a political group, trying to keep our Constitution intact. And as he says, he's a bleeding heart conservative. He's trying to keep the original Constitution and the Bill of Rights intact, And we won't get too political, but he doesn't think that George W.'s group is doing that, But in any event, so he just retired. Jerry took over, and we got to work with him, and it was just, it was exciting. And but it was the first one that didn't go. Every show they had, they sold. So we had to go back out and, start again. And then next thing you know, we'd have a Broadway show going, in development. They never happened, but they, although my sister actually was able to do the Rascals in Goodspeed Theater in Connecticut, and a lot of great plays went from there to Broadway. Again, this one didn't, So, it was a lot of that kind of stuff. But while we were doing it, we were still selling the Rascals. And at that time, right around 1970, the end of 77, about December of 77, we started to work with the Colbert television sales. And Colbert Television Sales had an exclusive arrangement, and he was partners with Jack Barry and Dan Enright. And they were brilliant game show producers. And Jack was a really a brilliant game show host, really an excellent television personality. But they had, their history went back to the quiz scandals, when they, Robert Redford did a movie called The Quiz Show, and that was about Barry and Enright. And they had the #1 show on television, and with Ed Van Duren, and they were giving him answers. It wasn't against the law. All they had to do is just put the disclaimer that some of the answers were given to the contestants, but they didn't do that, and they were, according to Dan, God rest his soul, he said he was pushed to do it by the networks and the sponsors, and but like I said, it wasn't really against the law, but everybody was, it was a big shock, and people felt it was a sham, and so the networks kind of went the other way, and Dan, testified in front of Congress and lied. And that one is what really got him in trouble. So both of them were kind of banned for a while. And they came back, and they have a hell of a story too. They came back in the early 70s, and they started game shows in syndication. And Joker's Wild and Tic-Tac-Toe became two of the biggest. And so King World at that point had my brother Bob, my brother Roger, my sister Karen and Diana, and myself working there, along with a few other employees. And we really had a very unique arrangement that we could work as a sub-distributor with Dick Colbert. And it was really like becoming a protege. And realistically, I wouldn't have been able to have that experience unless I left the company and worked for another company and worked my way up. This was really fascinating because we could still work at our company, and we would cover a territory and get a small commission, but at the same time, we were really getting tremendous, schooling in business and first-run television in a much bigger way. And Dick Colbert was really one of the best. He'd come out of the motion picture business, selling movies to theaters, and he went into television, ran 4-Star television, which was four major stars at the time. And so he really was a seasoned, top-notch professional. And we were his proteges, and he mentored us. And we really, really, at that time, expanded. And that was from 1978 until around 1982. So it was literally 5 years under Dick Colbert. And at the end of that period of time, there was some issues. We weren't you worked together that closely, and he was, charming, incredible salesman, and difficult at times. So, it ran its course, and at this point now we were ready to start as a full-fledged distributor with new first-run television programs. And that's where Wheel comes in.
But before that, so you were doing like...
What a great segue. See it tomorrow.
Going back to...
bored enough yet? A lot of this stuff doesn't make sense to you, I'm sure. Because it's another error. None of these people, you're not familiar with most of these names, are you?
Yeah, Stephanie's.
Yeah, oh, you are? Okay, cool.
What shows exactly were you selling for Colbert? And also, was it under the King World banner or under the Colbert banner?
Well, Dick Colbert was the exclusive distributor for all of the Barry and Enright shows. And we started selling Joker's Wild and Tic-Tac-Toe. So we helped launch Tic-Tac-Toe. Joker's was already in syndication pretty successfully, but not as national. It was only in probably 30 markets or so. So we were right there, with his rise, And it was a pretty exciting time because Barry and Enright really were pretty prolific in producing a lot of shows. And although they weren't all great shows, they did come out with a lot of them, And I'll never forget, there was this one show, and I know Dick wouldn't like this story probably, but they had this show, Tales of the Haunted, and it was a psychological horror. And there was a series in syndication that was doing pretty well, and it was a psychological horror, and it was, I think it was called Tales of the Unexpected. So very close. What did I say the other one was? What was it?
Tales of
the Haunted. Yeah, so you can see we were trying to ride the success of this other one. And I'll never forget, Dick said, how would you like to sell a show that was a cross between Alfred Hitchcock and Twilight Zone? And I said, are you kidding me? Anyway, by the time we saw the show, it was neither one of those two. But anyway, we wound up, believe it or not, my brother and I, we were able to sell it. My brother Bob, Roger, and myself, we were able to sell it in all our markets, and we put it on for a 2-week test in the summer. And from there, if it worked, the stations would put it on in the fall. And when it premiered, because it was in 97% of America, it premiered, and the reviews came in, and they said the only horror in Tales of the Haunted was the producing, directing, and writing. So that was a short-lived show, but they weren't, like I said, they weren't all classic hits. That's probably part of the color too,
And there's also a period before Wheel of Fortune where you went to Florida with Roger.
That was actually before Dick. I was working at King World by myself for a while, and Roger was always calling me up saying, "Oh man, I'm having so much fun down here. You ought to come on down. This is everything you want. You can even be host of the show." Because I used to perform, and Roger was a performer too. And I said, "No, Roger, I got to build the company. And we're just starting to go." But I have to be honest, it wasn't fun working in my brother's house, And Roger was an incredible salesman. So he'd give you a different pitch every time, and each one you wanted. He sensed I wanted to do it, and so after about 4 years of working at King World, or maybe it wasn't 4, close to 4, we hired my brother Bob, and then I went to Florida with Roger to work on the all-night show, which was, this great new opportunity. And when I got down there, I said, look, I want to take some time off, and I'd like to relax, get in shape, lay on the beach, that kind of thing. So I drove down with my mom, and we got down there on the Super Bowl weekend, and car packed, and I moved in with Roger, and he had a condo that he'd rented, and in any event, Monday morning came around, he gave me a rate card and told me to get out there and sell, and it seemed he was having some problems with the cash flow, so we were only making $200 a week there, and so we sold that for about a year, and we were able to turn it into a hell of a show. I mean, because of cable. It was a UHF station that nobody could tune in, and but cable made it just like Channel 2, which is a VHF channel. So we were the only station on from midnight to 6 in the morning. And so Florida was an all-night town. So this became a major show. And not only that, they started picking it up in other communities because, believe it or not, TV went off at midnight. It's kind of hard to remember that now, but because you see TV, 24 hours. But most stations went off the air. And in fact, I don't think there were any that stayed on. And so here we have the only channel on. Every community that puts us on. And we had all the great movies from the 30s and 40s, the Bogarts and the Jimmy Cagneys and the Moby Dick with Gregory Peck, and just some really, really great classic films. And Roger and I were co-hosts. We were there live so that we could do commercials, because the station was the equipment was so bad they couldn't run the commercials. So we used to do them live a lot, And anyway, it became a big success, and we were, about to actually buy the station, which we could have bought it for literally $3 or $4 million over payments, and it was sold to, of all people, Jerry Parental, because he did that subscription TV thing in LA. Well, they started expanding. They did it in Chicago, and they did it in a lot of other major markets. And he flew down because we were doing the Rascals. He flew down to Florida because we were telling him about, my brother Bob was telling Jerry about this great station that was doing this all-night show with his brothers. And Jerry went down and bought it. He flew down, but he bought it with $15,000 down. And he wound up buying it for, I think, a total of $4 million. But the station literally cheated my brother Roger out of 7.5% ownership. He had a check and everything. He had a letter contract, and Miami was pretty wild back then, and the judges were pretty corrupt. And anyway, Jerry Parental told the owners if they didn't give Roger some kind of a payment, that they were going to walk away from the deal. And so Roger wound up getting a payment like $50,000 or something, which was pretty good money then, but not anywhere near what the station was worth. Obviously, 7.5% of $4 million, and we wouldn't have sold the station. We would have kept it, But we probably would have wound up in cable, which because who took that same idea? But Ted Turner.
Okay, let's stop there to change